the Financial Survival Network, helping you to survive and thrive in the new economy. To find out where to buy gold and silver reliably at great prices, go get your free Financial Survival Toolkit at financialsurvivalnetwork.com. You'll also get our complimentary newsletter. This is the Financial Survival Network.
1490 WGCH. This is Kerry Lutz, and you're listening to the Financial Survival Network, which is brought to you by Miles Franklin. They've been in business selling gold and silver for over 20 years, and I'm a customer because when you buy, they ship. For more information, find them on the web at milesfranklin.com or give them a call at 800-822-8080 and get a free quote. 1490 WGCH. This is Kerry Lutz. You're listening to the Financial Survival Network. If ever there was a time in history where so few people understood what's actually going on in the world, this is certainly it. And while many financial advisors are losing clients by the boatload, my next guest, Danielle Park, is managing to expand her business during these uncertain times, which says a lot. Hey, Danielle, welcome back to the Financial Survival Network. How are you?
Thanks, Kerry. I'm good, and I'm surviving. Hey, that's great.
You're surviving and thriving in the new economy, which is what we're all about.
Yeah, exactly. Although one never wants to count their, chickens, or not be knocking on wood these days. I tell you, it's a tricky environment to navigate.
Oh, is it ever? Because all the tried and true things, all the things that you learned in school, they don't appear to be working now. And yet, we still have to go on. We still have to continue and try to get things done. So what do you do?
Well, I think the greatest gift that I got was a revelation about 13 years ago that we were very likely heading into a secular bear environment in global markets. And that little bit of premonition or idea was what prompted my partner and I to go and do a lot of research and work on how to navigate those type of risk cycles and what it would mean for which kinds of asset classes and how not to approach portfolio management if you were going to, hold on to your capital and grow it throughout the period rather than having it on a really incredible volatility ride with no net benefit. And it's just, I guess thinking outside the box sounds so trite, but really, Kerry, it's absolutely crucial. I certainly went through all the traditional training in finance and all the typical, exams and various thoughts of economics, et cetera. I was trained on all that, but really at the heart, I think, I was a bit of an outsider to begin with, and that's proved to be, I think, a gift. I think you have to come at this from an outside the establishment view to do the job well and to understand, because I think the greatest thing today is that people have basically been used to an inflating debt story for 30 years. So perhaps the entire adult life of most people today has been in an environment where, rates were cut repeatedly and reinflated consumption each time. And when you come to the end of that, you're in a whole new country. And if you don't understand that, I think you're lost.
Right. So, and you just answered my first question before I got to ask it, which is, what do you think is the most important thing going on now that will most affect you and your finances? And obviously that the debt cycle's over. So the next question is, what's the best way to prepare for that? How do you protect yourself? How do you guard your wealth? Because the credit paradigm is crumbling around us, right?
Right. So I think I'm a very practical person. I try and come at it from an everyday life kind of viewpoint. And so you can't fix an entire system all at once, but you can fortify an individual in terms of their habits and spending patterns. How do you get through challenging times like this? Well, it's very simple. As an individual, you try and spend less than you make. You try and continue to earn an income. Now, I realize that's hard for people that have lost jobs, but those who can reinvent themselves into having small businesses or having, little consulting things, anything at all to keep the income coming in. And then that said, you have to make sure you don't come into these periods highly indebted. And, that's the problem so many people, countries, and corporations are having today is that they didn't see this coming. They didn't prepare. It's interesting, Carrie, there's a lot of discussion about the Keynesian theory, about how he said that government should smooth the business cycle and you should spend during these weak times to help the economy recover. The other part of that equation was that during the boom times, you're supposed to anticipate the downturn. You're supposed to prepare. You're supposed to pay off debt. You're supposed to put savings aside, and you're supposed to keep cash liquid. When you've done all that, you get to these periods and it's not the end of the world. When you haven't done all that, you get to these periods and people go bankrupt in droves. And sadly, that is the lesson that many are learning at the moment, including countries.
Yeah, it's interesting. It's that old saw, in times of peace, prepare for war. In times of war, prepare for peace. In times of plenty, prepare for times of scarcity. And in times of scarcity, prepare for times of plenty, expand your business. So the best time to expand your business, what it comes down to, is during a recession / depression, credit bust. And the best time to be cutting back and controlling your costs and really managing things is when everything seems great and nothing can go wrong, right?
Well, yes and no. I mean, I think you have to have a very close tune into the actual demand cycle that's going on. I think that the smartest thing people can do when they're expanding their business is, do you have the money to buy the equipment? Do you have cash to put into something, or are you having to lever yourself to do it? I think that if more people avoided debt, and I understand that at certain points in the cycle, if you could borrow for a piece of equipment or borrow to purchase an asset, you can get into demand quicker, right? You can say, well, we goosed profits or we goosed revenue because we added that on and we were able to service the debt. But the problem with that is that then when the down cycle comes, when the slowing phase starts, the revenue diminishes and you're still left with the payments. So that's why, if I say to my children one lesson they can live by, try and avoid debt at all costs, number one. Number two, never get overly cocky in terms of spending too much in any particular expansion cycle. And I think that's hard because our animal spirits begin to race. When you've been in a business or a sector that's had a very strong run, people become more and more confident, right? More and more bold.
You start to believe your own PR, which is a prescription for disaster, because we're all fallible human beings. We all will make mistakes. And over-optimism, over-exuberance, as Alan Greenspan used to say, is the worst thing. It's a form of hubris. And if there's one thing we know from all the mythology, all the Greek tragedies, is hubris is a sure-fire way into bankruptcy, into the poorhouse, right?
Yes, hubris, but also just not taking too much credit for the success, not appreciating that you actually don't control the cycle in this stuff, right? You can't dictate how many customers come to you. You can advertise, you can try and promote yourself, you can do an excellent job and have a solid product, but at the end of the day, you're only in charge of your own choices. You're only in charge of your own, habits, discipline, how much you spend, how much you borrow. You can control all that. You can't control the business cycle. You can't decide when it's going to go up, further, down. So you have to really build that into everything that you're doing. So people look at Alan Greenspan. Did you happen to catch him on a recent interview? I think I was watching at the start of this week. And he was talking about it's a sad thing to watch, Carrie. Here's a guy who was the Pied Piper for the expansion for 20 years of adding debt. And he took that to his own ego as him being the leader of this magnificent expansion, right? And he never prepared for the downside. He never saw that would be a finite plan, that at some point you can't add more debt and you can't cut more rates to re-stimulate growth. And he apparently didn't anticipate that. So he was the guy that led everyone over the edge, but there was a lot of other people that were helping and a lot of complicity. Everyone was complicit in what went on. But now in his old age, he's like, in the dark of night, the horror, I swear, because he tells in the interview, he's saying, I've been writing book after book trying to understand how could we have not seen this? How could we have missed it? There was this end coming. And here's his conclusion, Carrie, after all this experience, after all the obvious evidence of his mistakes, his conclusion is, we couldn't have seen it coming. So that really tells you that denial is the preference of, many people.
It's not just the preference. They have to do it because if you can't engage in denial, then you have to admit failure and it's humiliating. So it's better to say it was beyond our control. No one could have seen it coming and we're only human. This is the way it works. So what else could we do? Then you don't have to take any responsibility and it was fate. And the fact is, everybody saw this thing coming. I knew it in 2006-07 because Benjamin Graham said it best, the tree does not grow to the sky.
Yeah, exactly. And I guess, I think I would beg to differ just on that point that you can't face your demons or your mistakes, because I believe that all the true good leaders in history, and Lord knows there's not been enough of them, but the truly good leaders were the ones who were able to say, look, I screwed up. I made a mistake. Here's what I've learned from it. Here's what I advise you to do as a result. And those people have the courage to see, yes, we're all fallible. Yes, we all make mistakes. Always will. It's part of the human being. But if you can learn from this experience, and this is where I go back to individuals, people that go bankrupt very often, it's a gift for the rest of their life. Why? Because they learn to hate debt. They learn that it's not their friend. They learn to avoid it and have a little more discipline in their behavior. Not all of them, but some people can learn that from it. And what I go back to on an investing climate here is, we've been in a secular bear market for 12 years. Stocks have had cyclical rallies, but they go back to retest the prior cycle low. If I put up a chart today of Spain and Italy stocks, Carrie, as an example, showing this very cycle. Now they're approaching the 02 and 09 lows for a third time. That is how these things work, because government stepped in to stimulate, but ultimately the leveraging is a stronger force. And so you get this writing down of assets and real wealth in the economy to a point where everything gets finally to a low, and then you'll get into the next secular boom period. But during that period, if you're trying to passively allocate to stocks and even commodities, if you're trying to do buy and hold, all the portfolio theory stuff that has been engendered during the, prior bull periods, it's devastating to capital. And the advisors that have only got that tool in their kit, they really are in for a hell of a go, and they are doing harm to their clients. They don't mean to, maybe they don't realize it, but my point would be, this is your third time learning this. You'd think if you cared enough, you would go back and try and look at how you're doing it, what you could do better, why you're not making a success of this environment.
Yeah, well, most people who were alive during the last Great Depression are dead now, and you really have to go back in history and study what happens to commodities, what happens to gold and silver during these credit busts, and what happens to stocks. If you look at them, you see that there's definite patterns and there's definite ways of protecting yourself. So if you, Joe investor, you've got $100,000 cash right now, what do you do with it, Danielle? Do you buy T-bills at a negative real interest rate, or do you look for something better?
Well, you have two choices in my view. You can leave it in cash, and yes, I know in theory you're talking about the fact that inflation is at something north of 2%, and the interest you're earning might be 2 or less that you're earning on the cash. But that's not really the point of it, Carrie. I'm not talking about a long-term park. I'm talking about having money available where you don't have to sell something else in order to buy things when they finally present at good prices. And so there is an optionality in cash that you can, people trash it all day long because they don't, mostly because people have a bias to get everyone into certain assets because that's how they collect their income. I mean, that's the truth. And it's unfortunate. But the correct answer without that kind of baggage going with it is that if you don't have cash, you don't have any ability to take advantage of these buying opportunities. And I'm thinking that we may get another really good one within it could be the next 3 to 12 months. Once this recession gets acknowledged in general and priced in, you'll see that stocks probably will have fallen another 20% or so from where they are now. And that may indeed be the next cyclical bottom. I don't know if it'll be the end of the secular bear yet because it depends how much propping goes on in the bond market in terms of government debt between now and then. But look what's happening in Europe right now. If you don't think the end game is coming to this whole print and hope approach, I would suggest to you we could see something explosive come out of the Eurozone in the matter of the next couple of days. It's really come down to Germany saying, no, I'm sorry, we're not going to give you any more free money without a bunch of terms, which I think is a rational thing for them to say. And then you've got a bunch of other countries saying, no, we're sorry, we're not going to let you become the sovereign in charge of our nation, which I think is a rational thing to say. But at the end of the day, you cannot marry those two because they are both correct in their own stance, but it means they can't, it's like a marriage that no longer works. You can't stay married when you're in misery together.
Good analogy. Good analogy. And yeah, I agree that having cash makes a lot of sense for possible bargains that are going to come up because it's certainly, I don't believe that we were ever in an economic recovery from the moment we crashed at the end of 2007, early 2008, and then it got reflected in the markets. There's never been a recovery, certainly not in the States. Arguably in Canada, you didn't have the real estate crash, although you might be getting it now. But, we've got real estate prices continue to go lower. We've got food stamp recipient at an all-time high. We've got the real unemployment rate at an all-time high, depressionary levels. All these other things, other than the Dow being, close to where it was 10 years ago, 12 years ago, there's nothing on the horizon here to suggest a recovery at all. Real GDP growth is anemic.
Right. So we do have some, let's say, hangover from the party. And I guess I would point out two important things. One is that real wealth was never what it appeared to be at the peak in 06, 07 either. Okay, so we all have this mental pegging problem where we look at the top of a bubble and say, geez, we're so much poorer now than we were then. Well, actually, that was fictitious wealth to begin with because it was propped up on incredible levels of leverage. So first of all, you have to say, okay, I didn't really earn all that. Hence, I've given easy come, easy go, right? So that's part of it. I think the other thing is that there are some good things that come out of bubbles, and deflation is one of them, quite frankly. For consumers, deflation can be a very good thing. For companies, it can be very challenging, right? Because they have to now lower prices in a falling consumption environment, and that means they have to rationalize a whole bunch of costs, and it's challenging for them to make anywhere near the kind of profits they were in the rising leverage environment. But you have to look at it like we created all this excess capacity in the world because everyone was buying on credit. That's now evaporated, and you've got huge excess of all sorts of goods and services all over the world. Now, some of them will have to merge and go out of business, but there will be weak pricing power here for a number of years. That means that, again, when you say to me, well, if I put cash in the bank and it's only worth, I'm only getting buttons on it or nothing on it or potentially a negative interest rate when you count inflation, yeah, but what if you take that $100,000 a year from now and you buy something that you wanted to buy today for 20 or 30% cheaper? That is a rate of return as well. And that's something that you can't, that's an excellent thing that's going to come out of this cycle. The fact that prices go back to where they ought to have been without all this credit crisis, before the credit crisis, means that you'll be able to afford a higher standard of living and more things. at less money, and everything will become more affordable for people. The other thing that came out of this boom, Carrie, is it's like the boom of the tech run-up. We're left with more supply, inventory, and producers of commodities across the board now than we had 12 years ago by a huge mile. And that will also help us, I think, over the next few years. Now, again, bad for commodity prices, I believe, because the demand will continue to go lower and disappoint, but good for those of us who need those commodities because they were too expensive in the last few years because of the credit bubble.
Yeah, your point's well taken because we're talking about deflation, real purchasing power, and if the attempts to inflate by the central banks don't kill the currencies in the meantime, then we'll live to fight another day. But everybody's concern is that they're going to step on the gas too hard, and that's going to lead to implosion of currencies, which we can only hope isn't going to happen. But I think the jury's still out on it. So,
well, I think it has happened, though, to a large extent. I mean, again, the U.S. dollar index, fell more than 40% from 2001 to the recent low. That there was a triple bottom made around 73 on the U.S. dollar index, and that's a hell of a drop. So, in many ways, people make the mistake of assuming you're going to get more of that going forward, when in fact the currency markets were probably already pricing in and predicting the big bubble in government spending and government debt over the last few years. That's why the currency fell so much. But now, if we're at the end of that political will and ability, frankly, because the numbers are so just ugly now, then this may be indeed the time that the U.S. dollar increases in value for a while, and just as no one was expecting it.
Yeah, you might be right, but I don't know. I don't see any political will to cut spending and to start a line-by-line item review of everything the U.S. government and any other government, not just the U.S., let's face it, it's every government. But where's the will to go through the budget and actually cut out the two-thirds that are waste, that is misspent, that the private sector would be better off investing in? I don't see it in the States. I don't see it in Europe. And I'm not sure that it exists anyplace, perhaps in Canada, perhaps, I don't even think it exists in China or in Asia. I don't see them, to a large extent, their problem isn't as great because they don't have these government programs to support their economies and their citizenry. But the will to actually reform government and to diminish the people's expectations of what it is government can do for you, I don't see you actually cutting back on that. But, hey, I could be wrong.
Well, I think you might be right that behaviorally people have a very hard time choosing austerity and cuts, and politically it's very untenable. But here's the thing. We got to the level of more than $1 quadrillion of leverage in the world leading up to 2008, okay, because of the way that the swaps market evolved, the credit derivatives market, all of the securitization of debt that went on. So what's happening is, as this money comes due, Carrie, we aren't able to roll that out into more securitization and more derivatives now because of the various changes that have happened in the world, because of the fact that it blew up and many of those players are now in decline, and the new regulations that are necessary but will inevitably suppress that kind of action going on in those markets. So if you look at it this way, if in your family you can continue to add to the line of credit, you may indeed have a hard time cutting back on spending. You may have an impossible time selling it to your wife and kids. We have to spend less because we have to spend less. And if they still have credit cards, they may or may not agree with you, right? But if you can't get any more debt, if your line of credit is full and there is no one else to give it to you, you then necessarily have to say to them, listen, we can't because we don't have the money. And I think that may be the forced austerity that is given back from the credit markets and the bond markets of the world, because there's just not enough capital to buy everyone's debt and to continue to add to it from here. So if you can't continue to create this magical potion of money out of thin air, which is what we've already done for the last 10 years in earnest and even before that, then I think that may be the catalyst where the budget simply has to be cut because there just isn't any more funding for it.
Well, I hope you're right. I don't see it in Washington. I think they could just print it till the cows come home. But at some point, that's going to fail, and the results are going to be catastrophic. In any event, Danielle, so you got some good stuff on juggling dynamite. I was reading. I checked out the Tesla S, but my name's not on the list, so I guess I'm going to have to wait a while. But
you wouldn't believe how much negative commentary I got, people pushing back on the idea of an electric car still. I saw this study, it interests me. I saw this study that said that people that can't believe in anything to do with global warming also can't believe in same-sex marriage. And I thought that was a kind of an interesting connection. I have no idea why the two are connected, but why would it bother anyone to have an electric car with zero emissions? You don't even have to buy the idea that the humans are causing climate change. But I'm saying if you can drive something that's silent and doesn't pollute our air, why would we not want to do that?
Well, I agree with you there. If it's economically competitive without government subsidies and the market produced it, and to some extent, I guess Tesla got some green loans just like Solyndra and the rest of it, but it appears that their technology is feasible. Certainly their Roadster, I don't think that was subsidized initially. That was the market producing it. So if the market can produce it and there's a demand for it, I'm totally in favor of it. But if it comes to the government picking the winners and losers and putting their thumb on the scale of a favored company, that's where I draw the line. But I love the concept of an electric car for a number of reasons. I met with a guy out in California. He had an electric motorcycle. The thing had a range of about 115 miles. It didn't have a transmission. It worked on a belt. And he just rode it around the block for me because I won't ride a bike. I'm too scared of it. But not that I'm too scared. I used to ride motorcycles in my younger days. I just passed it. Too many mouths to feed. So, but the thing was silent and it looked so cool and it was great. And hey, there's a market for it. But relying on the government to create that market, bad thing. And I think it really hurt GM and their effort on the Volt that the government bailed them out and forced them to produce that car, which I think in a lot of respects, the Volt is revolutionary, great vehicle, but a victim of bad PR and bad branding. But that's for another time, Danielle. And I'm going to do my homework and we'll talk about it next time, okay?
Sounds good.
All right, jugglingdynamite.com. And to hear this interview as well as many others that Danielle and I have done together, financialsurvivalnetwork.com. Also, if you have questions for Danielle or me, send them in kl@kerrylutz.com or just go to the contact form and send them in and we'll answer some next time. All right, Danielle.
All right, Kerry. Thank you. Bye.
Talk to you soon.